Here. This is part three of North Africa 1941. So we talked about last time was of course the Siege of Tolberk. So now that of course now Rommel has of course garrisoned the positions and reinforced the battle group and ordered it onto a defensive. The Tolberk garrison, even though it was isolated by land, it continued to receive supplies, right? And of course, the Allies regained the initiative here by maintaining, and of course, by maintaining possession of Tobruk and held the line. And of course, and then there was some inaction. Now I'm going to talk to you tonight about, of course, going on into Operation Brevity and Operation Battle Axe. So of course, um, the inaction of both sides would, however, not last for much longer. The Allies soon they soon after launched a small attack, Operation Brevity, in an attempt to push the Axis forces back over the border. Brevity was followed by a larger scale offensive Operation Battle Axe, intended to relieve the Siege of Tobruk. This operation also failed, so both these operations failed. The Allied forces they reorganized during the stalemate, right? So Claude Auchinleck succeeded Archibald Wavell as commander in chief of the Middle East Command, and this is still the Western Desert Campaign. So this goes on up until Operation Torch, pretty much, and of course, so and the Western Desert Force was also reinforced with a second corps to form the new Eighth Army, which was at the time made up of units from the British Army, Australian Army, the British Indian Army, and the Sudan Defence Force, as well as the New Zealand Army and the South African Army. So they combined forces. There was also a brigade of Free French under Pierre Koenig. The new formation launched a new offensive, which was Operation Crusader, and that was in November 1941, and we'll get to that as well. So Operation Brevity was a limited offensive conducted in mid-May 1941 during the Western Desert Campaign of the Second World War, conceived by the Commander-in-Chief of the British Middle East Command, General Archibald Wavell. At the time, Brevity was intended to be a rigid blow against weak Axis frontline forces in the Somme, Capuzzo, Bardea area of the border between Egypt and Libya. Although the operation got off to a promising start, throwing the Axis high command into confusion, most of its early gains were lost to local counterattacks, with and with German reinforcements being rushed to the front, the operation was called off after 1 day. Egypt had been invaded by Libyan-based Italian forces in September 1940, right? We covered that. But by February of the following year, a British counteroffensive had advanced well into Libya, destroying the Italian 10th Army in the process. The British attention then shifted to Greece, in which we did cover as well, which was under the threat of Axis invasion. While Allied divisions were being diverted from North Africa, the Italians reinforced their positions and were supported by the arrival of the German Africa Corps under General Lieutenant Erwin Rommel, and of course rapidly taking the offensive against his distracted and overstretched opponent. By April 1941, Rommel had driven the British and Commonwealth forces from Cyrenaica back across the Egyptian border. Although the battlefront now lay in the border area, the port city of Tobruk, 100 miles, which is inside Libya, had resisted the Axis advance, and its substantial Australian and British garrison constituted a significant threat to Rommel's lengthy supply chain. He therefore committed his main strength to besieging the city, leaving the front line only thinly held. Wavell defined Operation Brevity's main objectives as the acquisition of territory from which to launch a further planned offensive toward Tobruk, and the depletion of German and Italian forces in the region. With limited battle-ready units to draw on in the wake of Rommel's recent successes. On the 15th of May, Brigadier William Gott attacked in 3 columns with a mixed infantry and armored force. The strategically important Hellfire Pass was taken against stiff Italian opposition, and deeper inside Libya, Fort Capuzzo was captured, but German counterattacks under Colonel Maximilian von Herf regained the fort during the afternoon, causing heavy casualties amongst its defenders. Got concerned that his forces were in danger of being caught by German armor in open ground, conducted a stage withdrawal to the Hellfire Pass on the 16th of May, and Brevity was closed down. So it failed for the British. So he was certainly concerned with his forces being caught by German armor in open ground. So he conducted a stage withdrawal to the Hellfire Pass on the 16th of May, and Brevity was closed down. So yeah, the importance of the Hellfire Pass as a safe supply route was highlighted to Rommel, and 11 days later, it was recaptured during Operation Scorpion, a German counterattack. So, so the strength, okay, so the full strength of this, of course, the British and the United Kingdom and the Australian force, so William Gott and Archibald Wavell, they attacked with 3 infantry battalions. And of course, a battalion is usually about 300 to anywhere from regularly 300 to 1,000 soldiers. Okay, so that is, yeah, so that's 3 battalions, and that could be up to 2,000, 3,000 men. 53 tanks. The British took 206 casualties, 5 tanks destroyed, 6 aircraft destroyed. Of course, for the Germans, the element of several battalions were there, of course, and 30 to 50 tanks. I believe it is. Okay, so the Germans lost about 605 casualties and 3 tanks destroyed. It's still seems like a lot, but of course the rest of the German reserves pulled up, and of course that the whole operation with Brevity was canceled after day one. So you can see here, 15th Panzer Division, 5th Light Division. And then of course Hellfire Pass is here. Here's the Armored Brigade, 7th Armored Brigade. So as they attempted, it was called off. Lost too many casualties, and so of course then they're going to come out with an even bigger operation coming up, Operation Battle Axe. So this is Operation Brevity here. The Brits come in through here, of course. Wavell's troops and Gott, and Rommel's forces basically, in a sense, push them back. That's May 1941. Some Panzer IIIs there. Operation Scorpion. Operation Scorpion was a military operation during, of course, it's the North African campaign, and of course, Rommel was in charge of this, and of course, British forces are under Stafford Gott and this is on 26th, 27th of May 1941. Scorpion was a German counterattack on British positions at Hellfire Pass. So this is the counterattack in northwestern East Egypt. So in the response to Operation Brevity, the Germans pushed back. The German operation was a success and pushed the British out of Hellfire Pass and back to the Buch Sofafi line. Scorpion was Rommel's second offensive operation since arriving in Africa. The first one was against, of course, Tolberk and his major attack there, and of course his push against the British and pushed them out after the Brits took out the 10th Army, the Italian 10th Army and whatnot. After the great British victory over Italian forces in Operation Compass, the German High Command sent Rommel, of course, the Deutsches Afrika Korps. So he retrieved the situation, certainly. Rommel attacked at once and drove the British forces, of course, for the exception of Tobruk. And then, of course, Axis forces advanced about 15 kilometers into Egypt and occupied the town of Sollum in Hellfire Pass further southeast. Hellfire Pass is a gap in the escarpment which separates the narrow coastal plain from the Sahara Desert inland and is about 1 kilometer from the coastline. On the 15th, 16th of May, British forces attacked in Operation Brevity, but then, as I mentioned, Brevity pushed back. Um, Brevity forces pressed through that Hellfire Pass, but went on to attack the desert flank um, of the Axis forces all the way to Fort Capuzzo in Libya, but then they were driven back and held on to Hellfire Pass. Rommel recognized Hellfire Pass was a key position and then takes, and this is what happens, he takes it back. And as it allowed movement and supply between the coastal plain and the interior, um, and determined, and of course, he was determined to regain it. His attack came just 10 days later. During the evening of the 26th of May, 3 German assault groups deployed at the foot of Hellfire Pass between the pass and the coast. These were panzer elements of the DAK, commanded by Maximilian von Hoof. They attacked the next morning. Hellfire Pass was defended by the 3rd Battalion Coldstream Guards and supporting units. They fought well, but could not stop the Germans from securing a commanding position, leaving the British in danger of being surrounded and cut off. During the morning, General Gott authorized a withdrawal, and Lieutenant Colonel Mowbray extricated his force with great skill, but at the cost of 173 casualties, but 100 casualties from the 3rd Coldstream Guards alone. 4 field guns, 8 anti-tank guns, 5 infantry tanks, and there was no other British forces close enough to provide support. So General Gott ordered British units to withdraw from the pass, which was reoccupied by the Axis. The DAK had thus retaken all the ground lost to the British during Operation Brevity. Here we have MG-34 machine guns, and this, of course, is the 88, the German 88 Flak 37, 36, 37, and these guns, of course, are very, of course, as I mentioned in the last presentation, extremely capable. Some of the best guns of the war. So Operation Battle Axe, the British this is the further response from the British. Of course, it involves the 4th Infantry Division, 4th Armored Brigade, and the 7th Armored Brigade. So here we're going to talk about we have, of course, talking about desert rats. We're talking about of course, the British hanging on and fighting against a very formidable force. And of course, the Germans pushed back again, but of course, overall, this operation with the 8th Panzer Regiment and the 5th Light Division, this operation also fails. Their forces, the German forces, have the forces coming from Bardea and from Sidi Aziz, Tref Capuzzo, and these are areas that are under control of the Germans and Rommel, and they are able to reinforce against the British attack, which is coming in from Egypt. This is June 1941. This is Operation Battle Axe. Of course, Operation Battle Axe was, of course, commenced by the British Army in June 1941 with the goal of clearing eastern Cyrenaica of German and Italian forces. One of the main benefits of this would have been the lifting of the Siege of Tolberk. It was the first time during the war that a significant German force fought on the defensive. The operation did not succeed, though, of course, it didn't succeed as British forces launched their initial assaults during strong defensive positions created by German General Erwin Rommel. Of course, he was in charge of it operation overall. The British lost over half of their tanks on the first day and only achieved victory at one of their three thrusts. Amazing. Um, they achieved mixed results on the second day, being pushed back on their western flank, but repelled a significant German counterattack in their center. On the third day, the British narrowly avoided outright disaster by withdrawing just ahead of a German encircling movement, which would have cut them off of there from retreat. Of course, they were not able to retreat then. They either would have been surrounded and then, of course, surrendered, um, and without supplies. The failure of this operation led to the replacement of General Archibald Wavell. This is where Wavell is replaced. And of course, Claude Auchinleck is now taking over, of course. So with the events leading up to this and leading up to it, of course, you have the defensive, and then Tolberk, and then, of course, Brevity, and then, of course, Rommel. He then went on an offensive which, by mid-April, launched reached as far as Salem, Egypt, the sole remaining Allied position in Libya. Of course, Tobruk itself, and the Allied, and then of course the Allied response was restricted primarily to harassment by the Royal Air Force. So, having been informed by General Wavell that, of course, that the Western Desert Force was vastly superior to the Axis forces now in Africa, Winston Churchill ordered that a convoy of tanks and Hawker Hurricanes, convoy WS-58, codenamed Tiger, be sailed through the Mediterranean instead of having it sail around the Cape of Good Hope, a move that would save 40 days of sailing. The German force the German Armed Forces High Command, OKW, also concerned by Rommel's actions, sent General Friedrich Paulus to Africa to investigate the situation. So on the 12th of May, the Tiger convoy arrived in Alexandria, carrying 238 tanks and 43 Hurricanes. A total of 57 tanks and 10 Hurricanes had been lost when the Empire Song struck a mine in the Mediterranean, although the crew itself was saved. So this is just some good footage overall of the battle itself. There were delays in unloading the tanks, which also had to be modified for desert warfare and given necessary overhauls, which meant that the earliest day for Battle Axe to be launched was pushed back to June 10th. These tanks were intended for the rebuilding of the 7th Armored Division, which had been out of action since February, as the division was essentially tankless after losing most of its tanks to wear and tear during Operation Compass. Operation Compass, many of the division's personnel had been dispersed to other tasks, meaning the division would also have to be fully reorganized and retrained to become battle ready. Also on the 12th May, General Paulus, after witnessing one of Rommel's failed attempts to assault Tobruk, sent a report to OKW describing Rommel's position as weak, with critical shortages of both fuel and ammunition. In response to this, and with the imminent invasion of the Soviet Union, Field Marshal Walter von Brauchitsch, the commander-in-chief of the German army, ordered Rommel not to advance further or attack Tobruk again. So he was ordered to hold his position and conserve his forces. And of course, this is, of course, he sees what the British are doing. Operation Battle Axis, has begun, and so on and so forth. Okay, my mistake. Actually, so this is the preparation for Brevity and then Battle Axe. Of course, the British, so through Ultra Intercepts, the British also received Paulus's report, and Churchill, believing that one strong push would dislodge German forces, began to increase, and so he began to increase the pressure on General Wavell to immediately go on the offensive, and so that's where they're coming into attack. I thought it was this because, yeah, I got that confused. Anyway, okay, there's a lot going on here, so I'm trying to get it as right as I possibly can. So Webber quickly prepared for Operation Brevity, and of course that failed. A limited operation with the intention of seizing Somme, the Hellfire Pass, and Fort Capuzzo, then continuing to advance on to city Azaz and toward Tobruk as far as supply would allow, while not risking the forces committed. Its objective was to destroy as much Axis equipment as possible. Um, and secure a foothold for the larger Operation Battle Axe to be launched from once the new tanks were made available. And of course, the tanks they were preparing to operate as soon as possible, as once they get prepared for desert operation, desert warfare, and desert operations. However, the following day, William Gott, concerned that his 22nd Guards Brigade would be wiped out if caught in the open ground, should the Germans attack with tanks, decided to pull almost the entire force back to Hellfire Pass, and the operation officially ended on the 17th with only that captured. And of course, I explained some of that. The pass itself was retaken by a small German force on 27th of May during Operation codenamed Scorpion by the Germans, of course. So by the end of May, the Greek island of Crete had been fallen to the Germans. This meant that the German Air Force would have additional airfields available to threaten Allied shipping and also to protect their own supply convoys and troops in Cyrenaica. Delaying battle axe could therefore mean facing stronger Axis opposition. To offset this, the British Chiefs of Staff stated that it was imperative that control be wrested in the area between Somme and Derna, and British air forces in that region be reestablished. So they're going to attack right away, even though these will in the future by the third day Operation Battle Axe they've lost so many men, so many tanks. The British are pushing forces because they fear the Axis will continue to Rommel will continue to push and get stronger. They need to hit right away. So of course, this operation was Operation Battle Axe, of course, against German and Italian forces in Cyrenaica, Libya, and of course, this full objective, of course, of the operation was to force the Axis forces to lift the siege of Tobruk. So they were meant to get there to relieve Tobruk. The operation was launched on June 15th. Even though the Allies had air superiority and were optimistic about the battle would be remembered as a complete failure. One of the biggest shocks was that the British lost more than half of their tanks during the first day of battle and made a quick retreat to avoid being circled in by the Germans and being totally destroyed. I mean, you have your Matilda tanks and your Crusader tank. Half of your equipment is gone. And then the main reason for the failure of the operation was that British intelligence underestimated the size and capabilities of course, the German and Italian forces. The German and Italian forces were under the command of they had Rommel under full command, and the 15th Panzer Division that were specially trained and had the necessary equipment for anti-tank and of course tank warfare itself. So, and this is, of course, the end of Wavell's career, and Beresford, of course, he is part of 13th Corps, Arthur Conyngham, in the Desert Air Force. In this full attack, the Allies, of course, the British had 20,000 plus infantry, 220 tanks, 98 fighters, and 105 bombers. Quite a bit, but of course, the Germans had the defensive positions, they had the ground, and they had their tanks, and of course they had the 88 guns in the gun positions in the defensive lines, and they were set up beautifully. Of course, so you have 13th Corps, 7th Armored Division, Major General Michael Moore Craig, 4th Armored Brigade, Brigadier General Gatehouse, and of course 4th Royal Tank Regiment, Matilda tanks. Um, so the 7th Royal Tank Regiment, those are Matilda as well. Lieutenant Colonel Basil Groves. 7th Armored Brigade, Brigadier Hugh Russell. 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, Mark 1, 2, 3, and 4 cruiser tanks. And then the cruiser tanks, and then the Crusader tanks. The 6th Royal Regiment. 7th Support Group, Brigadier John Campbell. 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 106th Regiments, Royal Horse Artillery. First battle, King's Royal Rifle Corps, and the 2nd Battalion Rifle Brigade, divisional troops. And then 7th Hussars, that's Reconnaissance Regiment, Engineers, 4th Field Squadron, RE, and 143rd Field Park Squadron, RE. So the Matilda 2, of course, the Matilda 1 saw action in France, Battle of France 1940, and it seemed to do okay. Of course, the Matilda 2 infantry tank is a totally different design. Matilda 2 was dominant in the Western Desert Campaign in the autumn of 1940 and spring of 1941. Of course, it first saw action in the Battle of Arras in 1940. And was the only British tank used throughout the Second World War. Um, so of course it was totally different design. Matilda, of course, the Matilda 2. Of course, it terrorized the Nazis wherever it went. Apparently, you know, in North Africa, their thick armor earned them the nickname Queen of the Desert. However, they proved vulnerable as more powerful German guns appeared. They were last used by the British in June 1942, although the Australians in New Guinea kept them until the end of the war. So their full name is A-12 Infantry Tank, Mark II, Matilda 2A, and of course the British, the Australians used them. Even the Soviets had them. They were from the Lend-Lease Agreement, produced by England, and there was 2,987 of them built. They had a QF 2-pounder gun and a 7.92 Besa machine gun, and that's their coaxial machine gun. A crew of 4 and a weight of 26.9 tons. So they're heavier than a lot of the German Panzer IIIs and 4s that are coming out. And of course, their maximum speed, 16 miles per hour. Armor is 22 78 millimeters, so it's pretty good, pretty thick armor, but it's an infantry support tank. So, yep, it's a well designed and well equipped tank for its time, and it was used up until 42. Um, well, this tank proved itself against the DAC forces, Panzer Division, and of course some of them were still largely equipped with early Panzer II models, and then the Panzer IIIs and then 4. And of course these, of course, using inadequate guns sometimes against the Matilda. It saw good operation. Of course, it was called the Queen of the Desert by its crews. Matilda's armor was powerful enough in advantage in all tank-to-tank engagements against Italian armor and anti-tank guns during the early stages of the war, in Operation Compass, of course. So, of course, the already famous 7th Royal Tank Regiment, reborn in Britain, fully re-equipped with Mark IIs, took part both in late 1940 campaign and ruled the battlefield until late 1941. Of course, battle records included the conquest of Libya, seizing of Tolberk and Bardea, and later Operation Battle Axe. Germans in Operation Battle Axe, when the British are coming in with the Matilda, use well-placed AA batteries of course, with 88 millimeter guns, and they use them to full efficiency against the Matilda. No less than 64 were lost during a single day in the attack. Such a heavy toll raised questions about Matilda's fighting capabilities, but nevertheless it still proved efficient where opposing forces had nothing to respond with. The PEC 36, PEC 41, PEC 97, 38, and SPZB 41 were all but useless. But the rapid-firing accurate 88 served by skilled crews and taken full advantage of the flat ground with good visibility, and the infantry tanks Mark II's limited mobility condemned the large-scale frontal attacks using the Matilda. It was unfortunate. She was a good tank. So the cruiser tank, or Mark VI A-15 Crusader, was one of the primary British cruiser tanks of the early part of the Second World War, and perhaps the most important British tank in the North Africa campaign. The Crusader mobility made it a favorite for British tank crews, and once it upgraded with the Ordnance QF 6-pounder gun, the main gun, it made it more than a match for the early Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks it faced that are under Rommel's command. Retained in service because of delays with its replacement, by late 1942 the lack of armament upgrade, combined with the presence of the Tiger tanks later on among the Afrika Korps and the reliability problems due to the harsh conditions, led to the Crusader being replaced in the main line by U.S. supplied M3 Grant and Sherman medium tanks, which is what we'll talk about later on. So she was the first cruiser tank, first British tank to be armed with a 6-pounder gun. Design work for a new turret started in March 1941, but Nutfield, one of the designers, was not involved until late in the year when they adapted the existing turret with a new mantlet and hatch, of course. So this design is upgraded over time, but of course they are eventually phased out for newer designs. The Cromwell, the M4 Sherman. So these were not used. Now it was mainly the Matilda and earlier variants of the cruiser tanks that were used, but the Crusaders were not really used up until Operation Battle Axe. It was delayed due to training and first used in Operation Battle Axe, an attempt to relieve the Siege of Tolberk as the brigade swept around the flank. The Crusaders were caught by concealed anti-tank guns and lost about 11 tanks. The 6th RTR, Royal Tank Regiment, lost more tanks to action and defects in the fighting withdrawal of the next 2 days after that, of course, in Operation Battle Axe, when they were falling back. The 7th Brigade was re-equipped with further Crusaders, but the brigade had been expanded by the addition of 7th Hussars. They were not sufficient to replace older tanks. Some of the older, of course, some of these were not as sufficient to replace their tanks at the time. So here are the Crusaders here, and of course, there's more of the cruiser tanks, and of course, the Desert Rats is what they were called. So there's books about it, and one of the books here, Charles River Editors, the history and legacy of the British Army's 7th Armored Division during the Second World War, and they were called the Desert Rats, and for good reason. They took a real toll on Rommel's Afrika Korps. So these are just more of the units involved in Operation Battle Axe. Here, and of course, so here for the Axis powers, General Italo Garibaldi, which I talked about before. I have some documentation on him as well, Afrika Korps. So he's the overall, the Italian commander, General d'Armata Italo Garibaldi, is the overall commander of the operation of Axis operations, and then of course Afrika Korps General Lieutenant Erwin Rommel, in charge of the German Afrika Korps, 15th Panzer Division, 8th Panzer Regiment, 1st and 2nd Battalion, 1st Battalion of the 104th Motor Infantry Regiment, Reconnaissance Battalion 33, 1st Ebelzone of the 33rd Artillery Regiment, Banderjäger 33rd Battalion, so that they had Pak 38 and Pak 36 anti-tank guns, 15th Motorcycle Battalion, 1 anti-aircraft battery with 13 88mm flak, 18 and 36 anti-aircraft guns, 5th Light Division, General Lieutenant John von Ravenstein, and the 5th Panzer Regiment, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Trento Division, Lieutenant General Giuseppe de Stephanus, and that's the Italians, 3 infantry battalions, and 1 artillery regiment stationed at the Somme, Mesed, Capuzzo area, and then of course corps uh, troops and 2 regiments Italian infantry, 1 regiment Flak 88 guns. So it's the Flak 88 guns that took so many of the Crusader and Matilda tanks, certainly. Even though they had slightly smaller force, they're so well dug in that and of course the flat ground, those 88s could pick out British tanks miles upon miles away. 13,000 infantry, 13,200 infantry, 194 tanks, 130 fighters, and 84 bombers. It's a smaller force, certainly, than it's nearly smaller by definitely over a third, over nearly a half smaller in some instances than, of course, the British and Australian forces, and in that area. So here's some of the German, some of the Africa Corps crew, flak panzers, and of course you have the Panzer threes and fours coming down the line, and German infantry unit. The 11th Infantry Brigade, under the command of Reginald Savory, was sent into Operation Battle Axe with the objective to remove the Italian and German forces from the eastern part of Sarnesa. For the central push, the 7th Royal Tank Regiment made it to Fort Capuzzo, but they soon faced counterattacks from the 8th Panzer Regiment of the 15th Panzer Division. Despite the fast reaction of the 4th Indian Division, which quickly took Fort Capuzzo and beat off the counterattack, other parts of Operation Battle Axe weren't going as well. So even though they were able to push through in certain areas, fast reaction, day after day, of course, the second and third day, they're taking even more casualties. Entered Hellfire Pass. They headed directly into a trap in the form of a battery of 88 anti-tank guns, which were dug into the sand and therefore invisible from the distance to the British. Hellfire Pass would become a complete disaster. All but one of the tanks would end up destroyed, and the other tanks that were headed to Hafid Ridge didn't fare much better. Instead of being met with tanks as they hoped, they were met. Instead of being met with tanks as they hoped, they were met with any tank artillery. My 16th of June. So this is 16th of June. About 3/4 of the 200 tanks that the British had deployed as part of Operation Battle Axe were out of commission, and Rommel was about to launch a counterattack. And of course, here is the Flak Gun 18. So the Flak 36, Flak 18 guns are the ones that are taking out a lot of the Matilda tanks, and of course the Crusader tanks, which I'd mentioned just a while ago. So and here's Panzer 3 off J's, the Panzer Regiment, 21st Panzer Division. This is the Panzer 3 off J here, the Panzer Regiment. So this is LL Mean, and these are just examples of some of the 1942-41 variants. So the 15th Panzer Division attacked at Fort Capuzzo from the north, while the 5th Light Division made their way to the east to sow round the Beresford Paris 7th Armored Division, and before the battle turned into a complete disaster, the Commander-in-Chief, General Wavell, ordered his forces to withdraw. Here's Africa Corps' 15th Panzer Division, Panzerkampfwagen 4 tanks. This is one of them that was captured by the Allies. This is Panzer 4 D, I believe. So the conclusions of this battle, as the British forces were defeated and with no reserves at hand, Egypt was an easy target for Rommel because of his critical supply position, and the enemy On his rear, Rommel couldn't exploit the opportunity that he had, certainly. So, of course, this critical supply position, he pushed them further, almost to the breaking point, to the supply lines, to almost to the breaking point. During Operation Battle Axe, both sides of the conflict had relatively light and even human casualties. The Allies lost 969 men, of which 122 were killed, 588 were wounded, and another 259 were missing. The Germans suffered 678 casualties, of which 93 were killed, 350 were wounded, and 235 missing. The Italians lost 592 of their men in total. So the Germans lost a little less than the British, but the British lost a lot of their tanks. Of course, the Italians lost 592 men in total, so that's even less. During the tank battles of Operation Battle Axe, the tank losses were significantly bigger on the British side. 98 of their tanks were lost either from mechanical failures or because of enemy action. Uh, the Axis, on the other hand, had lost about 50 tanks without taking into account the ones that were repaired during the battle, despite the British having lost almost twice as many tanks as the Axis. This still didn't reflect the final outcome of the battle. The Axis were still in control of the battlefield, which means that they were able to recover all of the disabled tanks of both Allies and their own. So in the end, they would only have lost 12 tanks. Um, and then capturing disabled Matilda tanks and, of course, the Crusader tanks was a problem for the British, as well as that they could be reused and realigned with the Germans and reused. In some way, the air battles were similar. The British again sustained much higher losses than the Axis. By the end of the battle, they lost 33 fighters and 3 bombers, while the Germans lost 10 aircraft. The main reason for such high losses for the British, according to Air Marshal Tedder, was a lack of pilots to provide continuous air cover, which meant that the individual patrols that were in the sky at any given moment were relatively weak. So Operation Crusader was a military operation by the British Eighth Army between the 18th of November to the 30th of December 1941 during the war. Um, of course, the operation successfully relieved the Siege of Tolberk. This is the actual key battle that relieved the Siege of Tolberk. The Eighth Army's initial plan was to destroy the Axis armored force before advancing its infantry came, and of course, before advancing its, and of course, this before advancing its infantry, which came apart when, after a number of inconclusive engagements, the British 7th Armored Division were heavily defeated by the Afrika Korps at Sidi Rezegh. Lieutenant General Erwin Rommel's subsequent advance of his armored divisions to the Axis fortress positions on the Egyptian border failed to find the main body of the Allied infantry, which had bypassed the fortresses and headed for Tobruk. So Rommel had to withdraw his armored units to support the fighting at Tobruk, despite achieving some tactical successes at Tobruk. The need to preserve his remaining forces prompted Rommel to withdraw his army to the defensive line at Gazala, west of Tobruk, and then all the way back to El Agheila. It was the first victory over the German ground forces by British-led forces in the Second World War. So here's, of course, the 2nd New Zealand Division, and an objective is going through in here. And of course, and then here's the 7th Armored Division's objective here. And you're pushing against Rommel's forces here. And up to past Fort Capuzzo by Sidi Omar. And this first South African Division objective was here. Second Guards Brigade objective was here. So this is the map of the overall Operation Crusader. Um, and here, of course, what you're seeing here are of course, the Crusader tanks. Uh, so these are the ones, of course, they've been modified for desert use and whatnot. And then we talked about this in part of the earlier part of this presentation here. Following the costly failure of Operation Battle Axe, General Archibald Wavell was relieved as commander in chief of Middle East Command and replaced by Claude Auchinleck. And the Western Desert Force was reorganized and renamed the Eighth Army under the command of Lieutenant General Alan Cunningham. The plan was to engage the Afrika Korps with the 7th Armored Division, the Desert Rats, while the South African Division covered their left flank. Meanwhile, on their right, 13th Corps, supported by 4th Armored Brigade detached from 7th Armored Division, would make a clockwise flanking advance west of Sidi Omar and hold position threatening the rear of the line of Axis defensive strongpoints, which ran east from Sidi Omar to the coast of Halfaya. Central to the plan was the destruction of the Axis armor by 7th Armored Division to allow the relatively lightly armored 13th Corps to advance north of Bardea to the coast, while 30th Corps continued northwest to Tolberk and link with a planned breakout by 70th Division. There was also the deception plan, which used every means to persuade the Axis that the main Allied attack would not be ready until early December and would be a sweeping outflanking move through Jarabab. So Jarabab, an oasis on the edge of the Great Sand Sea, more than 150 miles, 240 kilometers to the south of the real point of attack. This proved successful to the extent that Rommel, refusing to believe that an attack was imminent, was not in Africa when it came. The plan was to engage the Afrika Korps with the 7th Armored Division, while the South African Division covered their left flank. Meanwhile, on their right, the 13th Corps, supported by some of this just read here. So this is just some more of it. These pictures here. This here is the M3 Stuart Mark 1 Honey, and that's the British variant of the M3 Stuart light tank. It has a 37 millimeter main gun. I built a model of one of these. It's an American-made tank, and these are some of the first American-made tanks that the British are using here. And here, of course, is the Crusader, the British Crusader. M3 Stuart is light. It's a mobile vehicle. It's a little bit faster, but it is not heavily armored compared to the M4 Sherman, which is a 30-ton tank, medium tank. So in June 1941, to the main offensive, Operation Crusader, the Allies launched Operation Battle Axe Offensive, and it had, of course, had failed. With a new commander at the helm, Claude Allenchuk, the Allies planned a new offensive against the Axis forces in Libya, which with particular focus on relieving the Siege of Tolberk. While the British planned for such an attack, an effort was launched in parallel to deceive the Axis into thinking that the British would not be able to launch any major offensive until early December 1941. Additionally, false intelligence was shaped in a way that, to the Axis leadership, it appeared that the offensive would come from the area in Garabub, an oasis village far to the south. The offensive was planned under the codename Crusader, inspired by the new tanks by the same name designation that were now arriving into the theater in larger numbers. The offensive was to be conducted by two British corps, the British 30th Corps under Lieutenant General Nori was consisted of major of course was consisted of Major General William Gott's British Armored Division, Major General Brink's South African First Infantry Division, two brigades, so that's two brigades, and the independent 22nd Guards Brigade. The British 13th Brigade Corps, British 13th Corps, under Lieutenant General Reid Goodwin Austin, was consisted of Major General Frank Messervys, Messervy's 4th India Infantry Division, Major General Bernard Furberg's New Zealand's 2nd Division, and the 1st Army Tank Brigade. On the Axis side, two formations stood in the British offensive's path. German General Erwin Rommel's force was consisted of the German 15th Panzer Division and the German 21st Panzer Division, the German 90th Light Infantry Division, the Italian 55th Infantry Division, Savona, and General Enea Navarini's Italian 21st Army Corps. So that's 4 divisions. The other formation defending Axis territory was the Italian 21st Motorized Corps, which was consisted of the Italian 132nd Armored Division, Ariete, and the Italian 101st Motorized Division, Trieste. A good portion of the Axis forces were near Tobruk, as Rommel was planning on launching a major offensive against Tobruk on or around 24th November. Before dawn on the 18th November, the British 8th Army advanced southwest of Mersa Metra, Egypt, with the British 7th Armored Division at the spearhead. This main column of the offensive crossed the Egyptian-Libyan border near Fort Madalena and then turned northwest. Meanwhile, the South African Division protected the southern flank, and the British 13th Corps and the British 4th Armored Brigade held the area west of Sidi Omar to counter a potential Axis counter-offensive through that area. The opening phases of the invasion were originally to be assisted by some of the 724th British and Commonwealth aircraft assigned to the operation. 724 aircraft, wow. But all ground support missions were canceled due to the unexpected bad weather. On the other side of the token, the bad weather aided the Allied efforts by preventing Axis reconnaissance flights from being launched, which could have detected the preparations for the operations. The first day of the offensive, no resistance was met. In the morning of 19th November, the Italian Ariete Division halted the 22nd Armored Brigade of the British 7th Armored Division at Bir El Gobi. However, the 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group of the same division were able to advance near Tobruk, capturing the Sidi Rezea airfield during the process. Meanwhile, on the same day, the British 4th Armored Brigade engaged 60 tanks, supported by 88 centimeter guns of the 88 guns of the German 21st Panzer Division on the offensive's northern flank. On 20th November, the British 22nd Armored Brigade continued its fight with the Italian Ariete Division. The British 7th Armored Brigade repulsed an infantry counterattack launched by the German 90th Light Infantry Division and the Italian Bologna Division at Sidi Rezea, and the British 4th Armored Brigade fought a second tank battle with the German 21st Panzer Division. On the 21st of November, in the afternoon of the 20th November, the British 4th Armored Brigade engaged with tanks of the German 15th Panzer Division after losing about 40 tanks during this engagement. The British 4th Armoured Brigade was now down to about 120 tanks. It had begun the campaign with 164 tanks. On the German side, the 21st Panzer Division was temporarily withdrawing for refueling. At dusk, the British 22nd Armoured Brigade arrived on the scene, but it was too late to assist the 4th British Armoured Brigade. During the night, Rommel withdrew all of his tanks northwest in order to launch a major counterattack on City Rizet. So I'm just using some videos out there on YouTube and whatnot. I don't own these videos. I'm just using some of them that have been from that battle and want to showcase instead of people just seeing words all the time for the presentation. So this here is the symbol of the 15th Panzer Division. So a lot of them have the different symbols on their tanks of each division, each unit, and of course this is the Dach. So the Africa Corps is certainly one of a kind in its fighting capability with Rommel. Although Rommel is a good field commander to taking over an entire army, it was almost in a sense to taking over a larger force. At least it was in a sense he did not do nearly as well, and it was almost overwhelming for him. On November 21st, 1941, the Allied garrison at Tolberk attempted a breakout, which surprised the Axis forces. By mid-afternoon, the Allied advance from Tolberk had advanced about 5.6 kilometers. It was at that time that the Tolberk garrison learned that the British 7th Armored Brigade, which was supposed to attack in the direction of Tolberk, started at 08:30 hours, had changed its plans due to the unexpected presence of 200 German tanks to the southeast. Instead of a full offensive spearheaded by armor, the tanks of the 7th Armored Brigade turned to face the new German threat, leaving the attack to infantry. Without tanks, the advance was slow. Thus, by mid-afternoon, the link-up attempt was abandoned. Meanwhile, German panzer troops captured the airfield at City Rizet in the early afternoon while fighting in the immediate area. Continued into the next day with heavy tank losses on either side. The British saw more tanks lost. Of course, also on 22nd November, heavy fighting developed between New Zealand and Italian troops near Sollum, while troops of the Indian 7th Brigade captured City Omar. On the 23rd November, troops of the New Zealand 5th Brigade advanced towards Sollum, cutting off Axis supply routes from Bardea. Also on the 23rd November, Rommel gathered the remainder of his 2 armored divisions and launched an attack together with the Italian Ariete Division to cut off and destroy the rest of the British 30th Corps. Brutal fighting led to heavy casualties on both sides. And here's one of the PaK-40 guns that the Germans used. PaK-40 are used as an artillery and can be used even as any tank, but it's field artillery. On 23rd of November, the Italian High Command in Rome, Italy, agreed to put the Italian 20th Mobile Corps, which included the Ariete Division and Trieste Division, under Rommel's direct command. This is some of the battle, actually, by the way, of Operation Crusader. Some of the color footage. There's a lot of color footage. There's the Crusader tanks there, and this is probably the first or second day. On the 24th November, German and Italian tanks sped for City Omar, splitting the British 30th Corps. Pressing on, Rommel ordered further advances on the 25th of November toward City Azaz, but the column was discovered and attacked by Allied aircraft. At City Omar, the German 5th Panzer Regiment attacked positions manned by troops of the Indian 7th Brigade, which fought off the repeated assaults with the help of their 25-pounder artillery. At the end of the day, the German 5th Panzer Regiment found itself exhausted. On 26 November, German and Italian forces converged toward Fort Capuzzo, but by dusk they met defenses manned by the New Zealand 5th Brigade. In the morning of 27th of November, Rommel withdrew the weakened German 21st Panzer Division from the fighting at the Egyptian-Libyan border. Redeployment. Of course, they redeployed it at Tolberk to help counter the Tolberk garrison's attempts to break out. En route west, the 21st Panzer Division was harassed by troops of the New Zealand 22nd Battalion, delaying their arrival at Tolberk for a day. The German 15th Panzer Division, however, remained on the offensive. At Sidi Aziz, the German 15th Panzer Division engaged in combat in the morning against outnumbered New Zealand troops and captured the position with 700 prisoners captured. Rommel personally oversaw this attack from the front. At this point, the Axis forces were within 4 miles of the British 8th Army's main supply base. But this fact was not known to Rommel until later. At noon, the German 15th Panzer Division reached Berchelta, but was halted by the British 22nd Armored Brigade and Allied aircraft. By the early afternoon on 27th of November, it was clear to Allied leaders that the Axis offensive was beginning to lose steam. During that night, however, Rommel knew his tanks could still press on. For most of the day on the 28th of November, the German 15th Panzer Division engaged British tanks, succeeding in pushing them back toward the west despite being outnumbered. Elsewhere, an Italian attack of 2 motorized battalions near Tolberk saw the capture of a New Zealand field hospital, which resulted in the capture of 1,000 troops and 700 medical staff members. 29th November, the German 15th Panzer Division started westward, south of Sidi Rezé in the morning. In the afternoon, the Italian Ariete Division overran the New Zealand 21st Battalion at point 175. In the evening, the South African 1st Brigade was placed under the command of the New Zealand 2nd Division, which launched an attack in an attempt to recapture point 175. On the 30th of November, New Zealand's 24th and 26th battalions were battered by Axis forces, and of course attacked at Sidi Rezé. At 06:15 hours on December 1st, the German 15th Panzer Division began an assault at Belhamed. And they were supported by large numbers of artillery pieces. The British 7th Armored Division was ordered to counterattack at Belhamed, and they might have been able to do so successfully given they outnumbered the German tanks, but miscommunications resulted in the British tanks moving into rear positions to cover a potential retreat by the Allied troops. By the end of the day, the New Zealand 20th Battalion was practically wiped out. Between the 4th and 6th of December, fighting took place across the front without decisive outcomes. The Allied reserves began to be committed as attrition began to take a toll, but the Allied leadership saw the situation as favorable to them. On the 7th of December, Rommel began to pull back by 10 miles toward Gazala, abandoning the Tolberk front. On the 10th of December, the Siege of Tolberk was lifted. So the World War II database online has a lot of different information on this battle as well as everything else. I mean, it's got a lot of different data, and I've used it in some of this in this presentation. I've used a lot of different sources for these presentations. The British 8th Army launched an attack on the Gazala line on the 13th of December. During the attack, the New Zealand 5th Brigade and Indian 5th Brigade attacked El Hamza, which was repulsed by the defending Italian Trieste Division, losing only .204 to the west. The Germans attempted a counterattack with 39 tanks, followed by 300 trucks full of infantry. But the attack was stalled, albeit at a high cost for the Allies. On the 14th of December, the Polish Independent Brigade was moved to the front in preparation for a new offensive beside the New Zealand troops, which began at 0300 hours on 15th of December. The attack surprised the Axis defenders, but it failed to breach the line. So this is Operation Crusader and Battle of City Rosé, and this is 18th November, December. So this to the 7th of December, 1941. So here you can see it's the timeline. 18th November, British forces advancing along the coast, bypassing Axis garrisons and armored forces. So 20th November, 22nd Armored Brigade advanced to engage Ariete Armored Division. 20th November, 7th Armored Brigades advanced toward Gambit, capturing Rommel's HQ, then move on to City Rosé. And of course, 22nd Armored Brigade attacks driven off by the Ariete Division. And so that is 4, right, 2, 3, 4, right here. So they are fought off. And so 5, which is here, Axis units moved to prevent Tolberk, a garrison linked up with the British advance. 15th Panzer Division, they engaged British tank concentrations at City Rosea, right here. 6 right here. Rommel orders 21st Panzer Division into battle at City Rosea. Both sides feed in reinforcements, and the battle spins out of control, and that's right here. 7. 24th November, while the British were recovering from the engagement at City Rosea, Rommel leads his 2 Panzer Divisions in a dash for the wire. So that's right here. So he is pushing them out in advance to try to keep the British out, and to push South Africa as the South African Division back. And of course, these units, of course, have limited supplies, and of course, Rommel has definitely lost a lot of his fuel, and his resources are spread completely thin. 25th of November, the British take advantage of the Panzer's absence, renewing their attacks on City Rosé and towards Tolberk. In Rommel's absence, he could not be found. The Panzer Group HQ orders the return of the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions to City Rosea, where the situation had become critical. And that's 8. And that's Rommel's HQ. The situation certainly has become critical. And also on the 25th of November, the Panzers once again attacked the British at City Rosea, pushing the British back at a heavy cost. Rommel realized his forces were too weakened to continue battle and ordered a withdrawal, leaving the British in possession of the battlefield and relieving the Tolberk garrison. So finally, on the 25th, Tolberk has been liberated. It is being liberated. Later on that day, the Axis forces attacked and recaptured Point 204, causing high casualties among the Indian units defending that position. At the end of the day, Rommel decided to fall back from the Gazelle line during the night. Over the following 10 days, the Axis forces fell back to the line between Ajdabiya and El Hesea. So this is what I showed you before of the overall attack of Crusader. So on the 27th of December, after the Axis forces were able to replenish, an attack was launched that resulted in a tank battle at El Hesea. The British 22nd Armored Brigade suffered heavy casualties. Nevertheless, this would prove to be the last attack during this period, and Rommel's forces were now unable to return to the border area between Libya and Egypt. So on January 2nd, 1942, the last Axis garrison on the Egyptian-Libyan border, Bardea, surrendered to the South African 2nd Division, resulting in 7,000 men captured. Sollum was captured by South African troops on January 12th. Hellfire Pass, with a 5,000-strong garrison, surrendered on the 17th of January after running out of supplies. On the 21st of January 1942, Rommel tried one last major counterattack, capturing Benghazi by the first week of February, but the offensive was halted at the Gazala line. Rommel would find himself not able to regain the offensive momentum for the months to come. With Tolberk relieved, Operation Crusader was considered an overwhelming success, and it was the first major victory over German forces in North Africa, and the first major victory for the British against the Germans. At the end of the operation, the Allies suffered 17,700 casualties and lost 278 tanks and 300 aircraft. The Axis suffered 38,300 casualties and lost 300 tanks and 600 aircraft. Amazing. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for North Africa 1941. Thank you for listening. All right, Aaron Boma, military specialist for Carleton County.